Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This is the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be part 28, chapter 28, entitled Firing Squad. Shoda is going to punch Yagi in the fucking face. He's going to. He just knows it. What special kind of dumbass ignores years of carefully made and fully accessible lesson plans and just decides fuck it, and skips to battle trials? Fucking battle trials, which aren't even brought into the curriculum until the second term of the second year. It's nothing but pure luck that only 2 kids were hurt, but one of them, Izuku, because of course it would be Shoda's own son, has permanent hearing loss, a permanent injury, from an exercise on the first day, all because Yagi can't supervise worth a damn and has no idea how to run a classroom. It is not either Izuku's or Bakugo's fault that their fight escalated the way it did, and Shoda knows this because, without even watching the recording of the battle trial, how the hell are 2 teenagers supposed to understand the dangers of their quirks and their support items if they haven't been given proper time to use them, in or out of a fighting scenario? Hell, Izuku has been taught by Hisashi, an expert on quirk control, and he still managed to put a little bit of Amahaki's power into a fist when he punched Bakugo, if Izuku's retelling is anything to go by. Which is not something he's ever done, because why the hell would they focus on something like that, when it has been hard enough to get Izuku to figure out how to control from a distance? And that's not even mentioning Bakugo's support items. So yeah, Shoda's going to punch Yagi and then make sure that he doesn't get anywhere near his students ever again. Unfortunately, Shoda has a class to wrangle at the moment and doesn't have time to stop off at the teacher's lounge to give Yagi a piece of his mind. Fuck. He has to be a responsible adult, and promise his class that nothing like this is going to happen again. He's going to have to apologize for Yagi, and if the retelling of today's fundamental heroics gets back to the wrong ears at home, he's going to have to apologize to parents, too. God damn it, Yagi. When he steps into the 1A classroom with Shinso on his heels, he finds 17 students sitting anxiously, apparently unable to focus on anything except the clock and the door. Snipe is sitting behind the front table, carefully watching all of them, but he stands as soon as Shoda is past the threshold. Immediately, the class erupts. Are Izuku and Bakugo okay? Are they coming back to class? Was Recovery Girl able to heal them? Shoda holds up a hand and stares them all down, while he pushes Shinso toward his desk. It takes 5 seconds for the students to settle, and when they do, Shoda turns to Snipe. Thank you for watching them. I've got it from here. Of course. Snipe pats his shoulder on the way out the door, and then Shoda's left alone with 18 very concerned and probably traumatized students. Bakugo and Izuku are sleeping in Recovery Girl's office, he says, leaning against the table and shoving his hands into his pockets. The class is silent, leaning forward in their seats. Bakugo made a full recovery after his healing. Izuku has permanent hearing loss in his left ear, something that none of you are going to pester him about, understood? Yes, Sensei, the class choruses. Good. They will both return to class when they wake up. I hope that I can count on some of you, on taking notes to share with them when they return. Yayorozu and Shinso both nod so firmly that Shoda nods back at them. Thank you. Now. He pauses to look over the whole class, trying to gauge how they're feeling. Aside from concern and relief, they look mostly all right. I would like to apologize for what happened today. Your first fundamental heroics class was meant to be a costume critique, and some quirk and support item exercises against dummies so that your teacher would know how to move forward with you all. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and I'm sorry for that. Shinso raises his hand. Aizawa-sensei, it's not your fault. A murmur of agreements run through the room. Did All Might apologize to you? No one says anything, but many of them shake their heads or look down at their desks. Then, while it may not be my fault, it is my responsibility as your teacher to apologize for the way that class was handled, and to promise that something like this won't be happening again. He sighs, and his demeanor softens. We have a few minutes before your next class starts. I want to ask you all if any of you were specifically uncomfortable during the exercise, especially those who were chosen to fulfill the role of villain. Ashido shakes her head. Izuku, I don't know how he knew. He's really smart, but he made sure that Shinso-kun, Tokiyama-kun, and myself were all put into hero teams. God, Izuku's a good kid. He has a protective streak that's going to get him into serious trouble one day, but fuck, is he a good kid. I'm glad. Anyone who wasn't singled out, how were you feeling after being assigned to play a villain? Kaminari's hand goes up. I don't want to speak for everyone, but after Izuku kinda laid into All Might, which was super manly, Kirishima interjects, I felt like being on the villain team wasn't really villainous, I guess. It felt like he stripped away any negative connotations to it, made it just sound like it was just a complicated spar, or a game of hide-and-seek, I suppose. So for me, at least it wasn't so bad. I don't feel like I did anything villainous, and no one has been, weird about it. Half the class had been labeled as a villain in a battle trial, where the goal was to capture or incapacitate. The fact that none of them seem to be shaken about that is a goddamn miracle, and the fact that not a single student is pushing quirkism or snide remarks at students who were villains is a relief. Is Izuku going to be in trouble for talking back to a teacher? Tokiyami asks, with Dark Shadow peeking over his shoulder, and the quirk's head is tilted to the side as if it too is wondering about Shoda's response to that question. Because he only did it in our best interest. I would like to share the punishment, if he is. Me too. Mina, Shinso, and Yagirozu, they all say it in unison, before glancing at each other and nodding. Shoda sighs. If this was under any other circumstance, yes, he would be in trouble, but as it stands, with the disastrous way that your class was handled, no. I'm not going to punish him for this. The relief sigh that sweeps through the class would have been comical in any other situation. Now, though, it just makes Shoda proud of his own son for putting his foot down when he saw something wrong. It does also make him a little nervous. How few of these kids have ever had someone stand up for them? And why is it that Izuku is always the one putting himself between a victim and someone with too much power and not enough sense? The easy answer. Because Izuku's heroic, plain and simple. Izuku's exactly the type of kid who's going to thrive in the heroics course and change the world on the other side of graduation. He's going to save lives and speak out against injustices, and it's going to be beautiful to watch. The complicated answer. Because Izuku has been the victim. Because he knows what it's like to be abused. He spent years under the thumbs of some of the worst villains Shoda's ever heard of, and all that trauma built and built and built until he exploded. And then he was given a safe space to decompress, and 2 pro-heroes to teach him that standing up for himself is a good thing. It's only natural that that mentality would shift its way over to standing up for other people. All right, gremlins, Shoda calls as the warning bell rings. Try not to give Ishiyama-sensei a hard time. Don't burn anything down, don't summon any demons. Yagirozu is in charge until Ishiyama-sensei gets here. Yes, sensei. With a quick nod to the class, Shoda grabs his bag and heads off to 1D. The rest of the day passes rapidly. Baka goes back in class before lunch at the end of Modern Lit, and Izuku is right back after lunch. Both boys have apparently made friends already. No surprise for Izuku, who makes friends as easy as breathing, but it is surprising for Bakugo, whose attitude is as prickly as his hair. And they're swarmed with concern and well-wishes on healing the surface-level wounds that Shizenji-san hadn't been able to mend. There are no more surprises throughout the day, and no more disasters that need to be mitigated. When the final bell rings, Shoda stays at the podium and waits for the students to trickle out. This was a normal day. He and Izuku would walk to the teacher's lounge and hang out for about an hour while Shoda got a head start on some grading and Izuku did homework. But it's not a normal day. Instead, Izuku and Shinso hang back and wave their friends off. Todoroki's the last to go, pausing by the door with one last questioning look to make sure that Izuku's okay. And then they're alone. Dad. Izuku's tapping his fingers, index to pinky against his thumb. Is All Might going to be there? Since it's just the 3 of them in the room and it's after hours, Shoda doesn't mince his words. I told Nezu that if I saw All Might again today, I would punch him, so if he's there, then the rat is looking for violence, but I doubt it. Shinso tries to hide a sarcastic laugh and a cough and fails spectacularly, but Shoda decides not to call him on it. Izuku's posture relaxes, all the tension leaking out of him. Clearly he doesn't want to see the blonde idiot any time soon either. Probably because they're about to go into Nezu's office and cleanly lay out every single failure that oaf did today, all in under the span of 2 hours. Understandable, but Shoda snorts anyway. What? You can give him a verbal lashing in front of your class, but not in front of Nezu? Judging by the way that Izuku grimaces and looks away sheepishly, Shoda hit the nail in one. It's different when I'm actually trying to get him in trouble, Izuku admits. During the class I was just looking out for my friends, but now... He shrugs. I don't know. It feels different. Shoda walks around the podium and crouches down in front of Izuku, whose fingers are tapping faster and harder, nearly falling out of rhythm. He's about to reach out and snag one of his hands, but Shinso beats him to it, threading their fingers together cleanly. Yeah, Shoda's not surprised by that. He's 30 and hasn't dated, but he's not blind. He knows Izuku and Shinso are more than friends and have been for a while now. Someday, they'll get the nerve to tell Shoda that, and then Shoda can shoo them out of the house and send them off on proper dates. Until then, he'll get to let them think that they're any good at keeping secrets. Listen to me, Izuku, Shoda says, opting to place his hand on Izuku's shoulder, his left shoulder specifically, because there's no way in hell he's going to let Izuku start to subconsciously favor his right side, or disfavor his left. Izuku lifts his gaze to Shoda's, green eyes filling with so many emotions that Shoda can't keep track. You're doing the right thing. I know that it feels different from holding firm to your morals in the heat of the moment, because afterwards everything that happens results in consequences, and making sure that consequences are given out is just as important as standing between a bully and a victim. What do you think would have happened if Hizashi hadn't fought the principal of your middle school for fair treatment of Shinso's bully and eventually the principal's removal from the school? What do you think would have happened if you and the other victims hadn't given your statements to the police after the villain attack? Izuku screws up his face, but he doesn't turn away. Bad things would have kept happening. Exactly. So, if the three of us don't speak up about what All Might did today, then... He trails off, intending for Izuku to finish the sentence. Then something like this will happen again, I know. Izuku says around a sigh. I know that. He's All Might, you know? I used to look up to him, and now... I don't know. He glances over at Totoshi. Just feels weird knowing that I need to get All Might in trouble. That I want to. Welcome to being a hero, Shinso says, voice dripping with sarcasm. Izuku elbows him in the ribs and squeezes his hand. Ow, rude. You're rude. And that's enough of that. Okay, problem children. Shoda cuts them off as he gets to his feet. We're going to Nezu's office. March. Get going. He sweeps out a hand so that they go ahead of him, bags slung over their shoulders and hands still firmly clasped. No, Shoda's not blind. But he is apparently a softy at heart because Izuku and Shinso, adorable. The trauma bonding is a little less adorable, but Shoda is confident that between Kiyumi-san and the therapist Kato-san had assured him Shinso started seeing after the kidnapping, this relationship hasn't been formed on the foundation of trauma. They're just dumb kids in dumb love, and Shoda's extremely happy for them. He's also a little curious about how Todoroki's going to fit into his friendship with them, if at all, but that still remains to be seen. Shoda's not invested, not at all. Hizashi, though, oh yeah. When Shoda eventually tells him that Todoroki was Izuku's personal crutch today, he knows that Hizashi's going to squeal with delight so loud that Shoda might have to use his quirk to cut the sound off. But that's a problem for future Shoda. Current Shoda has to tell a certain rat that the #1 hero is a dumbass who should be fired. When they arrive at Nezu's office, the door is already open and the secretary waves them in. Izuku, who used to be a frequent visitor of Nezu's, walks in without a thought, pulling Shinso along with him. Hi, Nezu-sensei, Izuku says with a gentle wave of his hand. Izuku-kun, it's good to see you again, and Shinso-kun and Aizawa-san as well. Nezu smiles at them all, though his gaze is only soft for Izuku. Shoda's just as stupid as he is blind, which is to say not at all. He knows that Nezu had taught Izuku things aside from typical middle school lessons. When Izuku had been in his office while Shoda taught classes, he knows because he was once Nezu's student as well. No way was the rat going to wait until Izuku's second year to begin teaching someone he felt a kinship for, and honestly, Shoda doesn't care. Nezu is a horrifying chaos demon, but he's a very good teacher. I prepared chrysanthemum tea, Izuku's favorite, and thumbprint cookies, Nezu says, waving his paw over the spread of the small table in the corner of the office. There's 4 chairs set up as well. Shoda takes the initiative to sit down first, and Izuku soon follows with Shinso right behind. Once they're all settled, Nezu closes the office door and joins them in his own seat. Thank you, Nezu-sensei, Izuku murmurs as Nezu pours his cup of tea. Once all the cups are filled, Nezu sits back and sips his tea. What brings you 3 here today? Point blank, Shoda asks, not drinking his own tea yet. Nezu nods. I don't want Yagi teaching fundamental heroics anymore, effective immediately. It's not exactly what Shoda wants, but there's a certain kind of delicacy in having All Might with the school. As much as he wants the dumbass gone, that would be nothing but bad press for UA, which Nezu will never accept. And Shoda knows this and accepts this, even if he wants for All Might to be fired. Nezu hums softly and turns his attention toward Izuku and then Shinso. Do you both feel the same way? Yes, Shinso says immediately. He is apparently taking nonverbal cues from Shoda because he hasn't touched his tea or the cookies yet either. He didn't look at any of the material that Aizawa-san had prepared for class. Didn't wait for the majority of the students to finish putting on their costumes before leaving for ground beta. Pushed us all into a dangerous situation, then didn't seem to understand what he did wrong, even after Izuku called him out on it. I see. Nezu's gaze flicks back to Izuku. And how do you feel, Izuku-kun? Izuku's halfway through a cookie, and 2 sips into his tea by now. There is tension in his shoulders and down his neck, but his fingers are loose and careful around his teacup. He also can't seem to decide if he wants to look at Nezu or away, and it takes Shoda a moment to realize that he's always turning his head, not to avoid meeting Nezu's gaze, but so that his right ear is closer to Nezu when he's speaking, making sure that he can hear everything. Fuck. Shoda's going to punch All Might the moment he next sees him. I don't know about punishments or what I want to see happen, Izuku says, setting his teacup down and starting to tug on his fingers. All Might doesn't have any teaching experience, that's obvious, and he doesn't think that he needs to be told how to run his class, that's also obvious. I know that he had lesson plans laid out from previous fundamental heroics teachers, And I know that Aizawa gave him a modified class roster to help him look at the quirks and personalities of Class 1A. He didn't consult either of those things. Or he did and completely disregarded them. Izuku raises his eyes from his lap, looking across the table at Nezu. His hands twist together, in a way that looks painful, something he hasn't done since Shoda's first brought him home out of the rain. "Problem child," Shoda says, reaching out to set his hand on top of Izuku's. "You're going to hurt yourself." "Oh." Izuku blinks and pulls his hands apart, quickly shoving them under his thighs. He turns back to Nezu. "I don't want to ask for a specific punishment, but I'll tell you what happened and let you decide." Nezu smiles. "That is agreeable to me, Izuku-kun." So Izuku talks. It's impossible for Shoda to remain passive throughout the story, even if he's heard it already. The worst part about the story is that Izuku isn't a liar, and his vocal tone is a clear indication that everything he's saying is true. He'd been nervous about the thought of battle trials, but excited to merge strategy with quirk usage. He'd been upset the moment that All Might started explaining how the exercise was actually going to go, but he'd had to push all that down to keep Shinso from slipping into a panic attack. He'd held himself back from yelling at All Might, but had still managed to undermine the oath enough to make him listen. Shoda is going to bribe Nezu for a recording of that conversation. He wants to keep it in his phone and show it off to Hizashi and Namuri. "And how did you get injured, Izuku-kun?" Nezu asks, because of course the scrapes and bruises haven't escaped Nezu's eyes, and it's illogical to assume that Shizenji-san hadn't immediately reported both Izuku's and Bakugo's conditions to Nezu. "Bakugo and I were fighting as part of the exercise. I don't think he knew how big of an explosion his grenade gauntlets could actually set off. It exploded right by my ear." Izuku rubs the back of his head. "And then I kind of just punched him, instinctively, and I broke his cheekbone." Nezu nods and sips at his tea. "And do you think anyone is at fault for the two of you getting injured?" "Ah." Izuku glances at Shinso first, and then at Shoda. Not like he's looking for answers, but more that he's checking to make sure they're still there. Shinso especially, since he's on Izuku's left. "If we'd been given time to test out our gear, then Bakugo would have known just how powerful his gauntlets were. Maybe he still would have used them at the end of the fight, maybe not, but he would have at least known. And that, I think, is All Might's fault." He looks down at his lap and then back up at Nezu. "Today's lesson was supposed to be costume and support item critiques, right?" "That is correct, Izuku-kun," Nezu says before Shoda can. "Your first term in the heroics course is meant to introduce you to the concept of heroics as a future career. It's all supposed to be fairly theoretical until after your summer camp. Even your internships after the sports festival are just a way to, say, dip your toes in. Which means that what Yagi-san did today is not something that I can condone or let go with a simple slap on the wrist." Nezu sighs. "Yamada-san is teaching heroics to the second years during the same time period. Since Yagi-san wants to teach quirk-focused and hands-on classes, I think it would be wise to have them switch. As a precaution, I will also have him submit his lesson plans to me ahead of time for approval. Do you agree, Aizawa-san?" Shoda can't really argue here. He's not the principal, and he's not the one who hired Yagi in the first place, but he is the homeroom teacher for Class 1A, and his son got hurt because of Yagi's stupidity. Priority number 1 is getting Yagi as far away as possible from all 20 of his kids. "Fine, considering the media outcry and how bad it would look if Yagi was hired and then fired in less than a week." He shrugs and finally takes a drink of his tea. "Excellent." Nezu claps his paws together. "I will notify both Yamada-san and Yagi-san immediately. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." And that's a dismissal if Shoda's ever heard one. He drains his tea in one large gulp, and then gets to his feet a moment later. Shinso follows his cue immediately, but Izuku hesitates for a moment and quietly asks if he can take a cookie with him. Nezu pushes the whole plate at him, and Izuku, hiding a blush, takes 3 of the remaining 6 cookies and stands up with a respectful bow. "Wait for me outside, will you?" Shoda asks with a glance at Izuku and Shinso. They look at each other, brows furrowed, like they're having a silent conversation before they both nod and leave the office. Shoda returns his attention to Nezu. "You knew," he says, careful not to be too accusatory. "You knew this would happen." Nezu thankfully doesn't play at ignorance. "This specifically? No. I never would have allowed this to happen if I had known. I knew that he would make a fool of himself, and I scheduled Yamada-san's class for the same time period so that I could switch them when it happened. But battle trials? No, I had hoped that Yagi-san would be smarter than that." "Why risk it?" Shoda asks. "If you knew he wasn't going to teach the first years properly, why assign him fundamental heroics at all?" "He insisted," Nezu says. "It's in his contract. I had to wait until he, as you would say, fucked up before I could actually make the change myself." Shoda stares, not at all accepting that answer. Yagi had wanted to teach the first years, had insisted on it. If Shoda weren't confident beyond a reasonable doubt that Yagi is, at his core, well-intentioned and good, he would be suspecting something nefarious. "Do you know why he insisted on teaching the first years?" Nezu hums, collecting teacups and the remainder of the cookies. He didn't tell me, but I know. He glances pointedly at the door. And I think you know, too. Memories of a hospital room flit through Shoda's mind. Steadily beeping machines, light blue bedsheets, a new scar blooming pale and stark on Izuku's throat. And then Yagi's insane offer that he never got to finish giving. A request that even now seems more risk than reward. Fuck punching him. Shoda's already thinking of where he can bury Yagi's body. Do you know what he was going to offer Izuku, I mean? Tension creaks all along Shoda's body. He isn't sure what answer he wants to hear from Nezu. He just needs a reason to not march out of the office and track Yagi down immediately. I do. Nezu's voice is gravely serious. And I must say, I am very proud of Izuku-kun for turning him down. And very glad. Yagi-san's request is not a mantle that Izuku needs to carry. Mantle. Interesting word choice that Shoda will think on later. For now, he just politely nods his head and leaves to go find his kid, and his kid's boyfriend. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 28 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 29 will be next. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to this chapter, and as always, thank you so much for listening.